Welcome to Wall Street Unspun with your host, Peter Schiff.
But it's a giant bubble in search of a pin, and it's going to find one.
Are you confused with the ups and downs of the economy and what it means to you?
Don't believe the propaganda, and that's what it is. When you're listening to an analyst on a lot of these popular financial shows, you're not getting investment advice. You're getting propaganda.
Get ready to untangle the web of misinformation provided by the mainstream media.
These firms are trying to sell you stocks. Their real clients, their banking clients, are trying to get rid of stock.
And now, here's your host of Wall Street Unspun, the president of Euro Pacific Capital and a licensed broker with a passion for truth. It's Wall Street Unspun with Peter Schiff.
Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another live episode of Wall Street Unspun. This is Peter Schiff, host of the show for the next hour. Coming on my website at www.europac.net. You can hear it. You can also hear it on shortwave radio at 5.07 megahertz. And also we do archive the show on the Europac website for those of you who aren't able to listen to it live, as well as all prior broadcasts of Wall Street Unspun are on the Europac website. Anyway, the number to call, I am taking calls live, 888-678-9597, 888-678-9597. I am taking your calls live from my office in Newport Beach, California. Those of you who have been listening long enough know that I started out in the Newport Beach office. This is where I really first began my first office, although I was working up in Marina del Rey. Before I had a business partner at the time, we were really just like a two-man shop. I bought my partner out in 2000 and relocated to Newport Beach and rented an office. And initially it was just me, and then I hired, I think, a receptionist, secretary, and eventually hired a broker assistant. But it all started in Newport Beach, and I'm back out here now in my new office. The third office we've had, we've moved now to the largest, I think, Newport Beach office. We have maybe 7,000 or 8,000 square feet here in the Newport Beach office, and have plans to expand the office quite a bit beyond the existing sales force. We're also doing my asset management business is headquartered here in Newport Beach. My investment banking business is headed here. Ultimately, institutional sales and trading will be headed here, as will my research department. So a lot of stuff is going to be going on from the Newport Beach office, as well as the retail brokerage. Just kind of waiting on the approval from the regulators so that I can finally make the expansion that I need. As many people know, that we have been held up for some while trying to do the things that we need to do in order to get regulatory permission to expand in areas that I really want to and need to expand it. But it's nice being out here. It's the first time I've seen this office. For those of you who live in the Southern California area, make sure and come down and visit the office. Also, I visited my LA office, which is also a nice office. Is relatively new in the scheme of things. I think it's been there, a year or two. But, do try to stop by these offices. And, of course, we have an office in Scottsdale, Arizona. I work mainly out of the office in Connecticut. In Westport, we have one in Manhattan. And we also have one in Palm Beach in Florida. Anyway, I'm glad to be able to do the show again. I'm taking a break from some of the campaign speeches that I've been doing, RTC meetings in the evening, because I am out in California all week. There is a little bit of campaigning. I did go to a fundraiser in Orange County, and I have another one in L.A. on Friday, but I'm mostly doing some Europac work while I'm out here visiting the offices. I have some investor presentations to make, but we will be back in full campaign mode again next week. I know in the meantime, we're getting close to the end of the fundraising quarter, and so I will be trying to do that too over the weekend and next week. Anyway, a lot of stuff going on in the markets. The dollar, all right, was very strong today, and I had thought, based on the sentiment, that the dollar looked like it was already ready to roll over and start to give up some of its advances, but instead the dollar kind of broke out. The dollar index closed at a new high for the year for the move. It's up around 82, which leads me to believe that the dollar might gain a little bit more strength before it rolls over again. I do expect it to roll over. I think the economic fundamentals continue to line up against the dollar, although in the short run, there has been a lot of focus on problems in Europe, which in my opinion are far less dramatic than the problems here in the United States. You know, there was an article today that I was reading. I forget who the individual was. I think it was worked at UBS, but he was pointing to the fact that Greece might default, and I've said all along that they very well may default. That was going to show that the euro was a failure, that the euro didn't work. If they couldn't solve this problem, it means that the euro doesn't work. And I think that's also what's putting pressure on the euro. My take is completely the opposite. If Greece goes bankrupt, that's a success of the euro. That shows that the euro does work. What would be a failure is to simply bail Greece out by printing more euros. That would mean that, the euro can be inflated, that debts can be inflated away. I'd like to see a eurozone where governments don't have that ability. They don't have that option. That will force fiscal responsibility on governments. That will force other countries like Portugal or Spain or Italy. The minute that Greece defaults, then people are going to be, worried about lending money to Portugal. So what's Portugal going to have to do? Portugal is going to have to cut back on their deficit spending in order to keep deficits low enough so that creditors have confidence to lend them money. See, we want lenders to know that there's risk when they lend. If they think that, there's going to be a bailout, then it enables governments to borrow too much money. We want fiscal discipline. The fact that Greece can't print euros and will have to default if they don't get their act together is not a failure of the euro, but a success. But, of course, in the short run, oftentimes the majority is wrong. They don't understand the bigger picture, and they often do the wrong thing. One of the reasons that people are still so confident in the U.S. Treasuries is because they know that the federal government can print money. But that should not give anybody comfort, because printing money is not the same thing as, really paying you back with real purchasing power. Printing money is defaulting. Sure, you get your money back, but you don't get your purchasing power back. And that is what's going to happen to U.S. creditors. It's interestingly enough, today we had a very, very weak auction of Treasury securities. Bond prices really got whacked. So even though the dollar strengthened today, Treasury prices lost quite a bit of ground. And ultimately, weakness in the Treasury market is bad for the dollar. It's also bad for the economy, at least the bubble economy, because if interest rates are rising, that means mortgage rates are rising. If mortgage rates are rising, homes are less affordable. Fewer people are buying homes. More people are defaulting on their mortgages. More problems for the banking sector, bigger budget deficits, more bailouts. All of this is dollar bearish. And people are still not focusing on the things that are dollar bearish. They're only focusing on the things that they believe are euro bearish. But the reality is, what they think is bearish is actually bullish. The question is, when will this be realized? I don't know, but I don't think that the dollar is going to be able to stage a significant rally. I don't think it's going to make a new high. Totally, I don't think the dollar index is going to get up into the 90s. But can it get up to 82.5 or 83 or 84? I suppose. It's not a guarantee. Meanwhile, if you look at the other currencies, you're not seeing the same type of weakness in the Canadian dollar or the New Zealand dollar or the Australian dollar. And even the European currencies, the Swiss franc is down, but it's not down nearly as much as the euro and, the Norwegian currency. So, the vast majority of this dollar strength is being driven by euro weakness. That's basically where it's coming from. Also, the fact that the weakness in the euro is helping the dollar is also hurting gold. Gold was down about $20 an ounce today. We're still comfortably above the 1,000 level, around 1,060. I still think there is potential for gold to go back down to 1,000 again or below. But I don't think it will stay below 1,000 for long, even if it even gets below. In the meantime, we are still doing quite a bit of business with the Perth Mint certificates. And if you're not in the Perth Mint program and you want to get more information about the Perth Mint program, you should call. We also run the Perth Mint out of the Newport Beach office where I am, as I mentioned earlier in the show. It's 888. To call directly to talk to Perth Mint. It's 800-993-8350. 800-993-8350 to get information on investing in gold using Perthman certificates. And again, as always, I think the price of gold is going to go up. In fact, I think it's going to go way up. But, of course, I could be wrong, and the price of gold could go way down. So be careful about the risks of investing. As long as I'm talking about this, I might as well get into the disclaimer that is good throughout the show. And, of course, if you're listening to this show on the Internet, you'll notice that on my website at Europac.net, you'll notice that there is a disclaimer on the bottom of the page there. If you just kind of look down, you'll see the disclaimer talking about the risks and things of that nature. But again, all the opinions that I express on this show are, in fact, opinions, right? Everything that I say is my opinion. My opinion can be right. My opinion can be wrong. Therefore, if you base investment decisions on my opinion, you might make money, and then, you might lose money, depending on, A, whether or not my opinion is right, and then B, whether or not the investment advice is right. It's even possible, as was the case in 2008, that a lot of the things that I say can happen. A lot of my economic forecasts can come true, but my investment forecast might not pan out. Certainly in the short run, there's a greater risk of that than the long run, but understand there's always a risk. Despite, the best laid plans of mice and men, we might think things are going to happen a certain way, and then we could be surprised that they happen a different way. So obviously, you got to do your research. There's risk in everything that you do, including doing nothing, right? There's a lot of risk, in my opinion, in holding U.S. dollars. You could just keep your money in cash. You could buy U.S. Treasuries because you think you're playing it safe, and you could end up being completely wiped out. But then again, I could be completely wrong. Anyway, also I wanted to talk about healthcare, and I know I did a video blog today about that, so I would again encourage you to go to my Schiff Report video blog and watch the 10-minute video I recorded today on the healthcare. And this is, obviously a huge negative for the U.S. economy, for the markets, whether the markets perceive that initially or not. What this health care bill is going to do is going to significantly increase the cost of health care in the United States and increase the cost of health insurance. And, of course, all of the government's estimates of the way health care is going to impact the budget all assume that the result of this bill is going to be a reduction in health care and health insurance rates. That's obviously wrong, so therefore all of their projections are wrong. Rather than reducing the deficit, this bill will help blow the deficit even further, into the stratosphere. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you can't insure 32 million more people and have the overall cost come down, right? Only in government, only in Washington can you insure 32 million more people for less money, right? That's, only government math can that happen. And, I mentioned one of these assumptions on my video blog, but the budget is replete with asinine assumptions that have no chance of coming true. And I also mentioned on the video blog, I wanted to address the constitutionality of the bill. Of course, it's completely unconstitutional, and there are going to be challenges. But just because it's blatantly unconstitutional doesn't mean the courts are going to strike it down, because unfortunately, a lot of stuff is unconstitutional right now. In fact, almost everything in the federal government is unconstitutional, yet the courts don't strike it down because the courts don't enforce the Constitution. They simply let the government get away with murder. But what I do have a feeling is that what happens is, as things are around for a long time, the courts are reluctant to overturn the precedent. They shouldn't be. I mean, just because a law has been around for a long time doesn't mean that it shouldn't be struck down if it's unconstitutional. If it's unconstitutional, I don't care how long it's been around or how much revenue the tax has been generating. If it's not constitutional, get rid of it. But I think when something is brand new, we have a better chance of the court actually honestly enforcing the Constitution instead of just, broadening the powers, the limited powers granted to the federal government in the Constitution. And, we have never had this situation in history where the U.S. government has required American citizens to buy a product from another American citizen or face a fine for not doing it. So it's a brand new thing. It's not like it's an old precedent. So maybe it's a new issue that the court can look at and say, does the Constitution give the federal government this authority? It clearly does not. And hopefully our framers will, I mean, not the framers, the court, that when they look at it, will understand the implications of this, because if Congress has the right to require us to buy insurance, well, then it has the right to require us to buy anything, because there's nothing special about insurance. It's the principle. If the government can tell us that we have to buy insurance, they can tell us that we have to buy, anything, that they think that we have to buy. And if we don't want to buy it, they can fine us. I don't want the government to tell me what I have to buy. And of course, if they can tell us, they can also tell us what we can't buy. I mean, right now they do that, right? Where they say you can't buy, drugs, certain types of drugs. But I mean, are they going to? If they can tell us we have to buy insurance, they can tell us we can't buy insurance. They can tell us we can't buy anything. I mean, they could. It's totally up to government discretion. And is that what we want to live in? Do we want to live in a country where the federal government is all powerful, where they can do whatever they want, where they can require us to do something and then fine us? And of course, if they can fine us for not doing something, there's no limit to how high those fines can be, right? That they can, so they can basically require us to do something if they make the fine high enough, or if they impose a jail sentence. So this is a really brand new powers beyond just the illegal taxing of regulatory authority. This is telling Americans what they have to do, right? And I know that they've said, okay, you can't. They have precedent with telling us that, okay, we can't do something. You can't, because we think it's harmful. But this is a positive thing. You've got to do something. You have to do this, or you're going to face penalties. So, and this is not the only reason that the bill is unconstitutional. But to me, it seems like it's one of the newer reasons. I mean, a lot of the other things that are wrong with the bill are the same things that were wrong with numerous bills. For example, Medicare was unconstitutional. Medicaid was unconstitutional because the federal government doesn't have the authority to involve itself in health care the way it has. But, of course, Medicare and Medicaid have been here for a long time. So the Supreme Court is not going to strike them down, unfortunately. So it's not going to strike down this law because of the things that are unconstitutional about it, which are also unconstitutional about Medicare. But this is something that is new. This feature where you have to go out and buy insurance from another third party, from another private party. Because remember, the insurance companies, right, they're profiting from this. We are being forced to buy their products, right? They get the benefit of selling us their products, but we're being required to buy them whether we want them or not. And so that, I think, is new enough that maybe we have a shot that the Supreme Court will actually enforce the Constitution, although I guess it is a slim shot because they never enforce the Constitution, so it would be a break of precedent, really, to have them enforce it. No, I mean, they do it in minor things, but they never seem to do it in areas that really impacts the federal government, which is, of course, where we need the Supreme Court the most. We need the Supreme Court every time the federal government tries to outstep the confines of the Constitution. We need the Supreme Court to stop it, to slap them down and to force them to obey the law. Unfortunately, I think of all the branches of government, the one branch that has let the American public down the most, the one branch that has been a complete and abject failure in every sense of the word, has been the judiciary, has been the Supreme Court. I think they're worse than Congress. I think they're worse than the executive. That one branch, that third branch of government, did not check and balance the other two the way it was supposed to. They have completely abdicated their authority, and instead they simply make law from the bench. They ignore the Constitution. They ignore the intent of the framers. All they do is validate everything that the federal government wants to do, whatever kind of socialistic, grandiose scheme that they have that was completely forbidden by the Constitution. They simply validate it. They pretend that the Constitution gives the government broad powers, and then they just completely butcher the wording of the Constitution, and they take very narrow powers and they expand them beyond anything that could have possibly been envisioned by the framers to create a government that is bound by no law. We might as well have no Constitution based on the way the Supreme Court interprets, in quotes, the Constitution that we have. I mean, we basically now have a government that does whatever the hell it wants. So what's the point of having a Constitution? And as I mentioned in my video blog, had this type of Constitution initially been proposed, back in 1790 or wherever it was, had this type of government been proposed to the colonists, not a single state would have ratified the Constitution, not a single one. And you know what? Based on how the government has so abused the Constitution, this country would be much better off had that Constitution never been ratified and had we simply been governed by the Articles of Confederation up until this point. We would probably be a much stronger, more vibrant economy today had this document not been ratified. Despite the fact that it was a brilliantly written document and a great document, it's just unfortunately we have been betrayed by our government, and in most specifically our judiciary in this respect. Anyway, let me go to the phone calls. I got to find where's my site that brings it. I'll take your calls, and I will. Also, this is my first. But a lot of you sent me birthday wishes, emails. We're on my Facebook page, and I appreciate all that. I read a lot of your birthday wishes, even if I didn't respond. But this is my first radio show as a 47-year-old. Anyway, so thanks everybody who wished me a happy birthday. Let me take the first call from Mike in Oklahoma.
Hey, Peter, great to talk to you.
Thanks for calling.
I want to ask you about a couple guys. The first of which is Glenn Beck. Now, I know that you've been on his show previously, and I know he knows who you are. And I listened to his radio show during the day, and there was a couple times when he's had other senatorial candidates on who pretty much think the way you do, and he doesn't. It's almost like he doesn't even acknowledge that you exist, because somebody actually asked him one time, like, what his top senatorial pick would be, and he said he named off like 5 senatorial candidates, and you were not in the list. The second person I want to ask you about is Ron Paul, because I know you helped in his presidential campaign, and I think I was watching a YouTube video with him in it, and there was a similar situation where someone asked him about senatorial candidates, or actually it was financial, who got it right in the past, like financial people, and he failed to mention your name. So my question is, have you contacted these guys to maybe help get your name out for...
Well, I mean, they know who I am, and the fact that they choose not to acknowledge me, that's par for the course. I very rarely get credit for any of my accurate forecasts on the economy in the media. And, I don't think Ron Paul has ever mentioned my name, even when I was economic advisor on his 2008 campaign. So, yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, it'd be nice if when Ron was on television, and he was talking about the economists that got it right, he could talk about some of the economists who are still alive, like me. And, I got it right on those very networks that he's on. So, yeah, I would appreciate if he did. I haven't called him up and asked him. I mean, he knows who I am. If he wants to acknowledge me, he will. I mean, it's not up to me to tell him to do it. As far as Glenn Beck, yeah, I mean, I've reached out to Glenn Beck. I mean, I'm not able to get a hold of him. I don't have any direct contact. I used to see him a little bit more frequently when I was on his show all the time on CNN. I've only been on it a couple of times. I think I've been on it twice with him as the host on Fox. I think I've been on it a couple of times, 2 or 3 times when he wasn't the host. He doesn't have as many guests as he used to have. He's got to know that I'm running. I mean, he must have seen the debates in Connecticut. He knows I'm a candidate. I'm running radio commercials for my campaign in Connecticut. I don't know if he listens to radio. My TV commercials start next week. I think they start on Monday. So I don't know if maybe he'll see them, but I mean he must know that I'm running. So it is kind of perplexing. I haven't been a guest on his radio show. I contacted the Glenn Beck radio people several times to try to be a guest. I used to be a guest when I wasn't a candidate. Now that I am a candidate, I haven't been asked to be on one. So I don't know. I mean, privately, I always had a very good rapport with Glenn Beck, and he always said nice things to me and about me, and he said I was his favorite guest several times when he was CNN. They had me on all the time. They initially booked me their very first, the Glenn Beck episode at Fox News. I was booked to be on the very first one, and then someone at Fox News pulled the plug, because I know there are some people at Fox News that don't like me, and so they pulled me off the Glenn Beck show, and so there's been some pressure there. But I really would like to get more support from guys like Glenn Beck on their show. I don't know. I mean, somebody should call up his show, his radio show, and ask him point blank. You live in Connecticut. Did you know that Peter Schiff is running for Senate in Connecticut? Why don't you support him? What about his campaign? I know one of the things he did, he had Deborah Medina on, who was running in Texas, and he didn't like her because of her views on trying to support the 9/11 truthers. Here I am. I mean, I've said that I've denounced that theory. I've said that I don't have any doubts as to who brought down the Twin Towers, and I don't think it was the result of some kind of government-led conspiracy. Yet, I'm not on the show, so he has, another, libertarian-minded candidate on the show, but one that he can criticize because of 9/11. He can't criticize me for that because he and I think the same way on that one. So, why aren't I on his radio show? Why aren't we, talking about it? I don't know. Maybe they're afraid to have. I don't know. Linda McMahon, advertises on a lot of these shows. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they like the fact that they're spending all this money on advertising, and they don't want to give me free publicity. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing. But somebody should call up and put them on the spot, because I would imagine that Glenn Beck's going to vote for me. If he's registered as a Republican, I can't imagine why he wouldn't vote for me. I mean, so I don't know why, he's not more enthusiastic about my candidacy, given the fact that he lives in Connecticut.
Yeah,
and I've certainly been on his program, when you count CNN, far more than anybody else in the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been trying to call him. It's hard to get into that show, and I've emailed him a couple times asking him, but haven't gotten.
Yeah, I would suggest that anybody listening to this, call into his radio show. I mean, if enough of us call in and say, Glenn, what do you think of Peter Schiff's candidacy? I mean, you live in Connecticut. Are you going to support him? Why don't you talk about him? Why aren't I seeing him on your show more often? Let's see what he says. I've never been able to ask him because I don't have his phone number. I can't get to him. I don't have his email. I don't have a direct. So I would ask him. I would ask him that if I ever got a chance to see him.
Well, I appreciate everything you do, Peter, and I will. I guess I'll get off and let the next caller take that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Glenn doesn't mention me because he doesn't think I have a chance of winning, which, again, I don't think that's true. As I said, my poll numbers are moving up. I think they're going to keep moving up. I think if people donate to my campaign, I think that would help. If more people went to shiftforcent.com and, we were able to raise more money. I saw Ron Paul had a money bomb on my birthday yesterday, raised over $300,000 in one day. I mean, that's fantastic. It'd be great if I could raise that kind of money, if people were sending me money like that. That might open up people's eyes. Maybe Glenn Beck would look at me, or other people would look at my campaign as being more viable if they saw that kind of money coming in. So, and maybe people aren't sending money in because they don't think I can win. I know I can win. The polls show that. The polls show that when people find out that I'm in the race, they're more likely to support me than either of my opponents. That's clear from the polling data. So it's as long as I get my message out there, I'm going to rise in the polls. I mean, that's the data is. It's just simple mathematics. So if I raise enough money so I can afford to run my radio and TV ads often enough, I'm going to win. I mean, that's all. It's as simple as that. And at some point, maybe my poll numbers will be high enough that people will start talking about me. But yeah, and it's not just guys like Ron Paul. I mean, I see people all the time on these financial shows, CNBC or Fox or CNN. No one ever talks about Peter Schiff getting anything right. No one ever mentions, when they talk about people that got, I'm always left out. And the question is why? Why is it? And I still think that I am not, if I was working at a major firm, if I was at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, or I work for the government, if I work for one of the acceptable institutions, yeah, they'd be acknowledging me and giving me credit. But, because I'm Euro Pacific Capital, because I'm independent, because I'm an independent thinker, because I'm outside the box, I'm still a thorn in everybody's side, they don't want to acknowledge me. They don't want to give me credit. Because it would give me more credibility. And they don't want to do that. They want to maintain the credibility of the status quo of who is supposed to be the credible sources. They don't want to keep talking about me getting it right, because then more people might listen to me and realize that they're still getting bad information from the conventional media and conventional Wall Street firms. Anyway, let me take the next call. That was Mike, right? The next one is Benjamin in North Dakota.
Hello, Mr. Schiff here.
Hey, Benjamin, how are you?
Doing good. My question for you actually is about an article that I saw last week here. I don't know if you read it or not. It says, global reality challenges IMF's free market gospel. I don't know if you read that article or not.
Which one?
It was on NPR. It says, global reality challenges IMF's free market gospel.
Mm-hmm. I didn't read it.
Pardon?
I did not read it.
Okay, basically it goes on how the IMF, it says after six decades of promoting free market economics, the IMF is rethinking its position stuff. And from all I've read in the practice, the IMF, it's how can they abandon something they never had here? They've always seemed to advocate for, like in African countries, debate.
Yeah, that always happens. Government poisons, pollutes the free markets with regulations and subsidies and mandates and all sorts of interference. And then when there is an inevitable problem, it is always the free market that gets the blame and not the government intervention that caused the problem. I mean, and that's typical. And that's, I did this video blog the other day on Alan Greenspan, and one of the things that so infuriates me about the guy, and one of the reasons that I said that maybe he is the worst American who ever lived, not just the worst Fed chairman, is instead of admitting, and he's in the limelight, people will listen to him, instead of admitting, I screwed up, right? Me, a central banker, made several mistakes, and that's why we had these problems. And if we had a free market in interest rates, we wouldn't have had these problems. Instead, what does Alan Greenspan do? He's saying, I didn't do anything wrong. We just didn't have enough regulation. It was a lack of regulation. And yes, all these years I believed in the free markets, and you know what? I was wrong. I put too much faith in the free markets. We need more regulation. That's what Alan Greenspan is saying. What he should be saying is, you know what? I should have known better. I believed in the free market, but unfortunately I didn't practice what I believed. I believed in capitalism, but you know what? I promoted socialism. I promoted statism, central banking, and that's what was a screw-up. If he did that, if he acknowledged that, people would listen. He's got the podium, he's got the stature, but no, he can't. He's so full of himself. He's so afraid of how people might view him in the short run. He's just going to lie through his teeth so he can pretend that he didn't do anything wrong. And that, I mean, that is, I think, the worst thing that he can possibly do. And I think he should be a little bit more concerned about how history is going to look at him too, because it's not going to look fondly on Alan Greenspan, and I'm going to do my part to make sure that that's how he's remembered. And as I mentioned, I think for a long time the name Benedict Arnold in this country was equated with the word traitor. Well, I'd like to see the name Alan Greenspan replace Benedict Arnold in the American lexicon of what exactly is a traitor. In fact, I'd like to see a picture of Alan Greenspan in a dictionary. When you look up the word traitor, just have a nice big picture of Greenspan right there.
Mm-hmm. But you should be able to find that article on the internet pretty easily. I don't know if you wanted to read up on that there just with that, but I thought it was a pretty interesting article there. Again, saying what going along with what you're saying there, they practice nothing like free market. Then when it falls apart, they blame the free market there. So again, just more of that as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I'll look for it. Thanks for your call.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Next up is Mike in North Carolina.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How are you?
Good.
I have a real quick question for you. I was actually typically certain investments tend to follow jobs and job growth and everything, and certainly that's not something that's going to be happening in the near future or anytime soon in America. But as far as foreign countries, do you see any other countries besides China having strong growth in the future? And if so, do you have any specific cities? I mean, I would imagine they would be countries tied strongly to commodity growth. But did you happen to have any? I mean, are you thinking of Australia is going to have strong job growth, or?
Yeah, look, I think there's going to be strong job growth in a number of countries. I mean, I think the biggest impediment to growth is global economic imbalances, and I do believe that ultimately those imbalances will come to an end when the world stops subsidizing the U.S. economy, and when they do, I think you will see a big pickup in job growth as foreign economies invest their savings domestically in job producing endeavors in productive capacity. And as incomes rise around the world, as the dollar falls and global purchasing power grows, there will be more employment opportunities. Hopefully, eventually, there will be employment opportunities in the United States. But before we get employment opportunities here, we are going to have a serious change in the nature of our government and how we govern our nation, how we conduct monetary and fiscal policy and regulatory policy. Right now, the government is a job-killing machine, and ultimately, we may have jobs in this country, but the jobs are not going to deliver a livable wage to the people who have them. I mean, ultimately, everybody in America can be employed at some bullshit, make-worth government job or some, job that is funneled through some bureaucratic channel. But it's not going to be much comfort to most Americans to work, and have nothing to show for it, but paper that doesn't buy anything. And I think that's still the direction that we're headed.
Right. Well, do you have any specific countries that
there are a lot of countries. I mean, look at I think there are plenty of countries in Southeast Asia, in the resource countries, in other BRIC countries like in India, and also countries in Latin America, and all kinds of countries are going to have job growth. Now, you want to have job growth for the right reason. Sometimes, most people don't want to work. Most people want leisure.
They have to be getting a livable wage and everything, right?
Yeah, but also most people want leisure. I mean, if all of a sudden, you have to get a second job and a third job, is that job growth? Or, if you need 2 or 3 jobs just to eat, is that a good thing that you got to have an extra job? You have to moonlight? No. In many cases, look at the 2-income family. At one point in American history, 1950s, even as late as the early 1960s, most married women didn't work because their husbands didn't need the income. The household didn't need the income, and so the mother was free to stay home and take care of the kids. But as living standards fell, as the dollar lost 2/3 of its value during the 1970s, as the government increased taxes and regulations, it made the husband's salary less valuable, and women were required to work so that their family could eat, so that the bills can be paid. Now, that was not a positive development because women had to work. Now, I think the fact that women having the choice of working is a positive development. The fact that women have in the workforce is certainly positive for the women who want them. But for the fact that women no longer have the option. See, at one point, it was hard for women to get certain types of jobs, but a lot of them didn't want jobs. I mean, they were very happy not working. But now you have a lot of women that are working in jobs, and they'd prefer not to work. I mean, they'd prefer to stay at home with their kids. But they can't do that because their husband can't afford to support them. Why can't a husband afford to support a family today when they could 30 or 40 years ago? Well, because 30 or 40 years ago, we had a lot less government. Our money was more valuable. Taxes were lower. Regulations were lower. So we can afford it. The fact that all these jobs were created was not a positive thing. We would have been better off if we didn't need all these jobs. I mean, imagine if the government keeps getting bigger and bigger, and then all the kids have to drop out of school. What if we have to send our elementary school kids to work in the fields? And what if we create jobs for 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds? Is that positive? Is that a positive development because young kids have to drop out of school and get jobs because that's the only way their parents can afford to feed them? No. A real sign of a growing economy would be if nobody had to work, right? What if we were so productive that we didn't even have to work? I mean, I remember I used to watch the Jetsons on television, and I remember George Jetson, of course, his wife didn't work, and he worked 2 days a week. And I remember him complaining. He said, these 2-day work weeks are killing me, right? Because the economy had grown so much, we'd got so much more efficient that even the man only had to work 2 days a week, right? The rest of it was leisure, right? The less we have to work, the better. And, of course, the only thing that George Jetson did on his job was he pushed a button. And he would complain that his button-pushing finger was killing him, right? Well, that's what you want. You want capital to eliminate work. You want living standards to rise so that humans don't have to work as much. So in many cases, creating more reasons to have to work is a sign of economic failure, not economic success. But obviously, when people can't afford to make ends meet, then they need jobs. The idea is not they need the job in the first place, but it is a failure when people are poor and they need jobs and they can't get those jobs because government rules, regulations, and taxes have made those jobs impossible to come into existence.
So one final question here. What do you think of the potential job growth in Canada and Australia?
I think it's strong. I think it's strong. And in fact, I've been meaning to read these comments that came out of the central bank of not the central bank, but the government of New Zealand that mentioned because there's people on unemployment benefits, and I think there were some statements about the fact that they're not going to let people keep collecting unemployment benefits. They're going to have to get jobs, any jobs, or lose benefits. Which is, I wish the attitude that we had here. We just continuously extend unemployment benefits now, for over 2 years or indefinitely, and we don't understand. But at least apparently the government of New Zealand understands that if you keep subsidizing people not to work, they won't work. And in many cases, receiving unemployment and not having to work is preferable to working at a job. Now, obviously, if you can get a good job, that's better than being on unemployment. But being on unemployment is better than taking a bad job or a low-paying job. But you know what? In many cases, there's actual productive work performed at low-wage jobs, and society would be better off if unemployed people took these low-paying jobs. But you know what? They're not going to take the low-paying jobs if they have a better alternative, which is to earn money and not take it for not having to work. So Canada, apparently New Zealand has figured that out, but we haven't figured it out over here.
So Canada, Australia, New Zealand would all be potential growth areas.
Look, I think there's a lot of growth areas, and look at the areas where we're investing around the world. I think the places that we're investing are the places where I feel most optimistic.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for calling. Also, I don't know how I can mention this. I had the problem with the regulators. I noticed it, but everybody knows that. We had a certain kind of product that we launched with respect to China some time ago. Well, we have another type of product that's getting ready to be launched at the end of this month, and I'm very excited about it. And I know that based on the regulations, it's almost impossible for me to talk about it. So what I would suggest is if you have an account with Euro Pacific Capital, or even if you don't have an account with Euro Pacific Capital, I know an email is going to go out on this particular product. So if you're in our email database, you will find out about it. But if you're not in our email database, call up your broker. Call up Euro Pacific Capital at 800-727-7922. And say you were listening to Wall Street Unspun. I mentioned this new product that I'm really excited about, but because of industry regulation, I really couldn't say what it was. And so you can call up and talk to your broker, and then you can get all the appropriate information, disclosures, whatever it is about this new thing that I'm really excited about. But anyway, so it's launching at the end of this month. Anyway, next caller is going to be... Who is next? It's Mitch in California.
Hi, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Peter. Did you hear the news today in California that Schwarzenegger approved $10,000 for all new home sales?
No. What do you mean $10,000? $10,000 what? What's the deal?
See, you know that whole $8,000 government tax credit?
Yes.
Well, now in California we are up to $18,000 now. Schwarzenegger just signed. You can now get $10,000 per California.
Well, get it from where? Where's California getting the money?
Well, that's what I was going to tell you. See, we're a lot wealthier than you thought, after all, huh?
Well, but California is broke. How are they going to give people $10,000 to buy houses?
That's what the headlines say today. So he approved it. So now if I were to buy a house today, I can get $18,000 tax credit. But I told my parents I'm going to wait for $50,000. I'm going to hold off for $50,000.
Let them. But again, in all these tax credits to buy homes, the politicians always say that this is to help the home buyer. None of it helps the home buyer because all the money goes to the home seller. So all it does is prevent home prices from falling. So it is not a benefit to people who are buying homes, which is the way the politicians always market it. It's not. It's a windfall for the people who are selling homes, in particular home builders who are constructing homes right now that they shouldn't even be building. The economy would be better off if home construction stopped because we have a glut of homes. We should be using those resources for other things, but instead they'll keep building them because the government is going to funnel here in California $18,000 to the home building industry through home buyer tax credits. If they didn't have the tax credits, home prices would simply fall, and people would not need the tax credits to buy the house because the house would be that much cheaper.
I agree totally. I'm with you. I just wanted to bring up, I didn't know if you read the news today, but anyways, my question was regarding, there's a movie out, this little animated thing by Paul Grignan called Money is Debt. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I've seen it.
You've seen it? Okay, there's also part 2 out. I don't suppose you've seen that.
No.
Okay, well, in part 2, because in part 1, he seems to be an endorser of a gold standard because he seems to be, talking about the evils of fiat currencies and such. But in part 2, he talks about the gold standard a little bit and says that why we can't use it is that if you have a gold standard, because of the ways that money works, because of the mechanics behind it, that one person will end up with all the gold.
No, that's all nonsense.
There's no validity to that?
Huh? No. No.
Okay, yeah, because he actually makes a case for it. If you want to watch part 2, and I just want to know if there's any validity at all to that argument, because that would kind of negate that ever happening. Then, because what happened to us when we had the gold standard, eventually it seemed like China would have had all the gold. Well,
I tell you, America had, when we were still on the gold standard, at one point we had something like 90% of the world's gold. And the reason we ended up getting so much of the world's gold is because the world wanted our products, and the only way they could pay for them was by sending us their gold. Because we made everything, we were the world's most productive economy, and if they wanted our automobiles and they wanted our washing machines and they wanted, all the stuff that Americans made, they had to pay for it with their gold because they didn't manufacture the things. We made everything. We were the greatest country in the world. We were the most productive country in the world. And that was because we were the freest country in the world, because we had the least government, because we had the lowest taxes, because we had a government that didn't spend much money, because we had few regulations. But you know what? Over the last 50 years, all that has changed. They'd layered our economy up with burdensome regulations, rules, taxes, government spending, and that vibrant, productive American economy no longer exists. It's unfortunate, but that's a reality. And, I hope that can change. I hope maybe if I can go to Washington, or maybe even if I can't, maybe there's somebody else that can pull it off. But we need another revolution because this country is nothing like the country it used to be. It's everything like the countries that my grandparents fled. In fact, I just read an article, and I put it on my website, and it totally verifies another one of my forecasts that I made and that I put down in my book, the little book of Bull Moves and Bear Markets, which also is going to get updated a little bit, and it's going to be re-released with a little bit of updated information. But one of the forecasts I made was that we were going to have an emigration problem, that Americans were going to start leaving the country, just like at one point they were coming here 100 years ago. And that what I forecast in my book was that the first people to leave the country were going to be children of immigrants, particularly Chinese Americans or Indian Americans, where they still have a lot of cultural roots to their native lands. where they still have a lot of relatives in those other countries, where language. And there was an article that was in the paper, I think it might have been the New York Times or I forget, but I put it up on my website, and that showed that there is a brain drain going on right now, that the best and brightest graduating our universities, graduating with advanced degrees, that the number one place that they want to go is abroad. That, and one of the biggest destinations is China, and particularly Chinese Americans. And they're saying that the Chinese Americans are leaving the country for the same reason their parents came to the country. They're looking for opportunity, and they can't find it here. And in China, there are so many young Chinese returning to China, they actually have a name for them. Right? And I think it translated into sea turtles or something like that. But this is what is happening. Americans are fleeing the oppression in the United States. They're fleeing this economy. They're trying to get out of big government. They're trying to get out from under the tax burden, the regulatory burden, and they're going to other countries because there's freedom there. Even in communist China, people perceive more economic freedom than they do in the United States. There is more opportunity for young people to succeed, to make a name for themselves and to make a fortune for themselves if they get out of America and they go to China. And this is only going to get worse. There's going to be more and more Chinese and Indian Americans leaving the country, and eventually it's not just going to be those people. It's going to be Americans whose parents have been here, for generations, who have no roots to other countries, who don't speak the language, who are going to pack up and leave because it's the only way that they can succeed. And if we want to stop a massive wave of emigration, we have got to do something now to change Washington and change these policies. I hear people talking all the time, we're putting all these debts on our kids. No, we're not, because our kids are not going to stay here and pay for our debts. They're going to leave the country, and they're going to stick us with our own debts. Anyway, I know I veered off your question, but thanks for calling.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, next up, Michelle in Michigan.
Hi, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead. You're online. And let me say, I think we've got some open lines, so if you want to call, anybody want to call, it's 888. Actually, wait a minute. There's only 7 minutes left of the show.
Right.
That time flies, so maybe let's take this as the last call. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hey, first, Peter, I want to say I'm a big supporter of your Senate race in Connecticut, and even though I don't live there, I've contributed to you a couple times.
Thank you. And everybody asks me all the time, hey, why should I contribute to your campaign? I don't live in Connecticut. I'm not running for governor. I'm running for senator. What I do in Connecticut affects everybody in every state. And, I'm out here in California, and, all I want to do is shrink government. I want to reduce government regulation, repeal regulations, cut government spending, reduce taxes. Everybody in the country will benefit equally from what I want to do. Whether they happen to live in Connecticut, where I represent, or any other state in the union, everybody benefits from less government. Everybody benefits from reduced regulations. Everybody's going to benefit. So there's a reason for people to support my candidacy. In fact, in most cases, like in California, what's the point of even supporting your own candidates? They're not going to do any of this. I mean, why even support a Senate candidate in California when it's not going to even matter who you vote? You might as well, think of me as your senator no matter where you live. Forget your local guy. They're not going to do anything.
Right. Well, that's how I feel. I mean, I feel like by contributing to you, it is working for me. And, I contribute to Rand Paul. I contribute to all the people out there running, and, I'm happy for it.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, do you have a question?
You know what? I have a quick question. How do you feel about the yen still? I know you used to like it. Do you still like it?
The Japanese yen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to go up. I think, Japan certainly has a lot of debt, and that's unfortunate, but they owe most of it to themselves, so it's very different than the United States.
Right.
But
what about
they've had their low interest rate policy for a long time, and I think that they're going to abandon it. But the problem is the reason that the Japanese have done all the wrong things is because they refuse to allow their bubble to deflate. We're following them. We're following in Japan's footsteps, but we're doing it from a much weaker financial position. So we're going to do much more damage to our economy than the Japanese did to theirs. Even though they've done a lot of damage, they did a lot of damage to a fundamentally strong economy. We're doing a lot of damage to a fundamentally weak economy. But I do believe that they're going to see the error of their ways because it's a much easier thing for them to do. They, if the Chinese will just let the dollar drop, if they stop propping up the dollar, the Japanese are still trying to prop up the dollar. They're still trying to, prop up or their exporters so they can sell products to America. That is wrong. That is what's hurting their economy. They are also bearing a disproportionate share of the burden of supporting the U.S. economy. And by supporting our gigantic consumer-based economy, it is causing problems in Japan. But the world just refuses to recognize this because the politicians don't want to deal with the short-term consequences of cutting us off. And of course, American politicians, they don't want to deal with the short-term consequences of being cut off because they're even worse. But what I understand, what I know for sure, is that as bad as it's going to be when the Chinese and the Japanese cut us off, as bad as that's going to be, it's worse if they cut us off later. The sooner they cut us off, the better it is for us. The longer they wait to do it, the worse it's going to be. That's why I'm of the opinion that we get it over with. We take the medicine, we swallow it now so that we can start the healing process instead of delaying it and making it worse.
Right. I totally agree with you. And I'm gonna write Ron Paul too and ask him to start mentioning your name more. I mean, I think that would help you out a lot. And I mean, you guys are our only hope.
And
you guys are our only hope.
One of the things is I'm not on television as much now as I used to be. TV shows are specifically not having me on because I'm a candidate. So when you're a candidate, it's difficult to get on television because they feel pressure to put all my opponents on. But when you're actually an elected official, like a Ron Paul, you can get on all the time because you're not, really running against anybody and there's nobody saying they need equal time. So it's easier for him. It was much easier for me to get on TV before I was a Senate candidate. I had this deal to be on CNBC twice a week, and then that got canceled because I'm a Senate candidate. So I'm having a more difficult time. The only way I'm getting on TV now is to buy my way on. I have to run commercials, and of course they're very expensive. And as I said, my first campaign commercial is going to start on Monday, and I need a lot of money to raise it, which is one of the reasons that I talk to people about donating to the campaign because now I don't get as much free TV as I used to when I was just a pundit and a stockbroker. Now that I'm a candidate, some of those TV opportunities have shut down for me. Which shows a lot of people that say, well, Peter Schiff, he's just running for Senate because he wants the publicity. No, I get more publicity as a stockbroker than I do as a Senate candidate. This is not about publicity at all. This is about doing what's right for the country because the country's in real trouble, and I understand that, and very few people in Washington do, and I know what needs to be done to solve the problem, and I'm willing to do my part to do it. But anyway, hey, thanks for the call because I'm now in my last minute.
All right, thanks a lot, Peter.
All right, everybody. Anyway, that's been a very quick hour. Time really goes by. Anyway, so don't forget, contact your Euro Pacific Capital broker, 800-727-7922. I know with my Senate campaign, the calls tend to sway towards the political end of the spectrum as opposed to the investment end of the spectrum. I can't help how the calls come because we don't screen them. But anyway, talk to your broker. Remember, this is about investing and protecting your wealth and preserving your wealth and doing what you can to protect yourself from these foolish policies coming out of Washington. I'm going to try to go there and change the policies, but don't count on that. Do what you can now to protect your own wealth and your own assets before it's too late. 800-727-7922. And remember, Crash Proof 2.0 and my new book is in the can, How the Economy Grows and Why It Doesn't, will be out, I think, the end of April, early May. Anyway, thanks, everybody. I'll be back next week.